Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're running this webinar with our panel discussion, looking at the topic, how Australian schools are adapting to the COVID-19 pandemic. Without further ado, the introduction to the topic, it sort of originally came out of a conversation that Matt Esterman and I had. We had already begun to do some webinars to try to help schools in the current situation. We did a couple on Google Classroom, we did one on teaching online, and we did one on teacher wellbeing, and they were great fun and people have really appreciated those, and we've got some great speakers to be involved in those. Chatting to Matt, what came out of that conversation was that it could be really valuable just to find out what several different schools are doing to adapt, just a real sharing of ideas kind of moment. From there, I've ended up with this really great panel who I'm going to introduce to you in a minute. And we have a series of stimulus questions to focus on as we all go around and share some great ideas about how schools are adapting in the current environment. So let me introduce the panelists. First of all, we have Yasodai Selvakumaran. Yasodai teaches high school humanities, is co-relieving head teacher, teaching and learning mentor at Rooty Hills High School in Western Sydney, and teacher ambassador for the Department of Education, New South Wales. In 2019, she was a top 10 finalist in the Vaki Foundation's $1 million Global Teacher Prize, and in 2018 was one of 12 educators awarded a $45,000 teaching fellowship from Australian Schools Plus and the Commonwealth Bank. Welcome, Yasodai. Then we have Martin Jorgensen. Martin is the head of digital learning at the Virtual School Victoria, an online F-12 school in Victoria with 5,000 students. He has also been for the past 2 terms acting assistant principal, curriculum and pedagogy. So Martin brings a slightly different tack, whereas everybody else is rapidly adapting. Martin's been doing this for quite a while, so he'll have some a perspective that maybe has had a little more time to bed down. Cameron Paterson. Cameron is a high school history teacher and is responsible for the strategic leadership of learning, teaching, innovation, and promoting excellence in teaching practice at Shaw School. He also works for Harvard in a number of capacities. He co-leads the Project Zero Sydney network, which provides free professional development for thousands of educators. Cameron is the co-editor of Flip the System Australia, What Matters in Education, and he is a passionate advocate for student voice, teacher agency, and shifting the dial from how do I cover the content to what sort of learners are we trying to produce. Welcome, Cameron. Natasha Mercer. Natasha's head teacher teaching and learning at St Ives High School. St Ives High School is a co-educational comprehensive public high school located in the Upper North Shore of Sydney. The school serves its local drawing area of St Ives, Hornsby and Mount Colah. This year, there's approximately 1,100 students at the school, which has a long-standing gifted and learning program and a dedicated hearing support unit. In her time at the school, Natasha has overseen the introduction of a Bring Your Own Device program in 2016. She's also led the school in creating a coaching culture, with students both trained as learning coaches for their peers, as well as teachers trained to be both student and teacher coaches. Natasha's also been involved in promoting project-based learning approaches to student learning and assessment as a way of ensuring students can connect their learning to the real world. Natasha is here today to speak about her school's specific responses to COVID-19 and doesn't speak for the Department of Education at large. Finally, we have Matthew Esterman. Matt has been working in education since 2003, having experience in government, Catholic and independent systems. He holds 2 master's degrees, one in learning science and technology from the University of Sydney and one in modern history from Macquarie University. His key areas of interest in school are engaging students in study of history, supporting mindful and innovative uses of technology, and creating amazing places for teaching and learning. Matt has been a highly active member of the profession, including as a presenter and writer for the professional associations like the History Teachers Association of New South Wales, the ICT Educators of New South Wales, and both the Australian College of Educators and the Australian Council for Educational Leadership. He's a fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts, has received awards from ACE, ACEL, ICT Educators of New South Wales, NGS, and was awarded the ACE Dr. Paul Brock Medal in 2018. He's the founder of Teach Meets in Australia, regularly leads or takes part in professional conversations via Twitter, Facebook, and other social media. He's spoken at local, state, national, and international conferences, including the ISTE and the US-based Educational Technology Conference, which regularly welcomes over 20,000 attendees. Matt is now part of the leadership team at Our Lady of Mercy College, Parramatta, as Director of Learning Technologies and Innovation. And myself, I'm Miles Campbell, founder and CEO of Teacher Training Australia, and in a prior life, a design and technology teacher. So, whew, what a panel. Thanks everybody, welcome. And let's dive in for our first question. How are schools managing student attendance? Can you speak to us, please, Yasodai?
So working at a department school, we've been following the department procedures on attendance, and there's been follow-up in terms of students who have been at home, and parents have been calling in. If it's COVID-19 is the reason, we've been logging that. But as individual teachers in our classrooms, even though students might not physically be there, we have been tracking the online attendance or the completion of work, more importantly. We soon realised that, we can't have students expected to be on in real time with all of the demands of multiple siblings at home and, just getting used to this. So we've, very much just looking at like when students turn in that work, if that counts as well, especially with our senior students.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. Matt, what are you doing at your school?
Yeah, quite similar. So we were in a bit of a holding pattern whilst we got some new codes for attendance, and I'm not an expert in that area, but I do know that we need to record things accurately in terms of why students aren't attending school or are. But we're doing similar to what Yaso and I know a lot of other schools are doing, which is if we do have some students who do physically attend, so our school is still open for those students who need it. And so we're doing that in the regular way, or noting that they're part of the continuous learning program, just like all other students. So we have a daily check-in where all students have to fill out a survey to indicate whether they are able to learn that day or not. And those students who aren't, those are the ones we focus on following up in the traditional way, in checking in with home or waiting for an email or a phone call to come through the Student Centre. And it's been quite astonishing how well students and families have adapted to that. I think because it's so clear and simple, it is just a repetitive thing to do, but it is a repetitive thing to do every morning. And we've had about, I think the last count was around 96% of students filling out that form and telling us whether they are or aren't ready to learn that day. And so really our Student Centre is only following up pretty much the same, if not fewer students for that particular day, just to make sure all our records are appropriate.
And Natasha, for you?
Yeah, so obviously as a Department of Education school, like following the same sort of policies that Yaso said before, we have for sort of a class by class roll call sort of followed, students have followed their normal timetable. So students are expected to check on the Google Classroom during their timetabled period. We decided that in terms of sort of settling in to online learning, if students followed their timetable as closely as possible, it would help them settle into a routine. It would also let us know, by noticing absences, how people were tracking with their attendance and sort of chasing it up that way. So they may not have a Zoom lesson every lesson. I'm sure I'll talk about that later. But students do need to check an online sort of role on Google Classroom. So there was a video going around, which I'm happy to link later on, about how to create a question on Google Classroom. So students literally just click if they're there during the set time that the teacher set, to say that they've read, the work for the day. For last term, we've had our deputy principals contacting home if there's been students that have missed a significant number of lessons. If it's just one lesson, then the teacher will follow that up. But that's what happened last term. This term, we're going to have our admin support create a spreadsheet going through the roles to sort of pick up on patterns, so that we're using them a little bit more differently as well.
It'd be interesting to know, I'll throw to you in a minute, Cameron, to see what you're doing, but whether, is this working, is it taking more or less time than it typically would? Has it been a big problem, or is it now settled down to not be such a big deal for schools? Are we managing it well, or is it, what's happening with you, Cameron?
I'd say we're probably managing it pretty well, but we're having to learn how to do it. So originally we just, like others have said, we were tracking student work and leaving it to individual teachers to follow up. And for the first week or so, that's required getting students into a bit of a pattern. So there were a few emails going home, which was extra work for teachers. We also asked that if students were sick for the day and unable to attend school from home, that the parents phone through and let us know. So they were the two basic elements that we put in early. We're in response to some parental requests, we're putting in a daily roll call type wellbeing check at 8:20 a.m. in the morning for years 7 to 11. So everybody is on a video call 8:20 in the morning, which is when period 1 would normally start. And that enables us to take the roll for period 1 to see who's actually there. And like others have said, we've got our learning management system that's actually able to track who's online and submitting what. So that's how we're doing it at the moment. We've got the added complication, of course, we've got borders. So we have some students at the moment who are learning from overseas. So you've got the time delay that actually goes in Hong Kong, for example. It's 6:20 in the morning when it's 8:20 here. So that creates a whole nother dilemma. And then we have kids in remote areas of Australia, Torres Strait, for example, with no internet or intermittent internet. So we're having to create all sorts of different options to be able to get some work to them as well.
Wow. Now, Martin, this would be something that, you've managed for a long time. Any thoughts on what you do and how that might be helpful for others to know about?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to sort of think about what's feasible and transferable, from the way that we do it. So I guess it's also, that question about attendance or participation and engagement, and, those measures are closely aligned, when you're determining, who's turning up to class. And if a student's lurking in the back of an online class and that's the only involvement that they have, well, I mean, for us, in our 7 to 10 cohort, for example, they're 95% are significant social, emotional, medical students. So they're, chronic anxiety, chronic depression, significant trauma for the majority of the cohort. So seeing those 2,500 students, for some of them just turning up is a win. And for some of them just turning up and, and lurking in the back of your online class is a significant achievement and might be their only goal for that month, just making some of those classes. So I guess it's a measurement, what measurement are you looking for? I guess, and attendance is a fairly simplistic measure. I think for us, we measure it in a number of ways, and most important is being able to build a narrative from that data, from that analytical data. So teachers have a dashboard that sits in the LMS that's, cup of coffee in the morning, you sit down, here are your 3 red flags. And those are, the amount of work that's come in and the students that have participated or not over the last 7 days. If there's been a significant drop in the participation, then that's front and center for those teachers in that classroom. They know immediately which students they need to call first thing. And that's really critical. And I think the other thing that's really critical for us is having that, the data from the LMS, the data from online classes, the data from the subjects that have Google Classroom, those that are, using Microsoft product, having all of that analytical data coalescing in one place so that you can build a narrative for that single student. And we have greater and lesser degrees of success with that, depending on the area of the school. We're getting much better at it, I think, over the last few years in particular. But it's, having a measure that you can tell a story to, so that when we sit down with the parents of that student, the range of, when we're doing a team around the learner meeting, that we can speak really carefully to, these are the forums they've participated in, this is the degree of interaction they've had in their online classroom, these are the documents that they're frequently opening, their measure of success, we can speak to it pretty quickly. I think that's the real key for us. Yeah. And as I said, well, I mean, we have greater and lesser degrees of success in that.
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting, and it'll be a shifting grounds, I imagine, as schools try things, students will then adapt to those things as well, so it'll be, they'll start to work out their ways to kind of, I don't know, tick the box that I've attended, but then still, maybe not be fully engaged. And I think it's something that came through chatting to Martin in the last few days, is that one of the advantages that they have there is they've had years to kind of develop some sort of specialization. So certain people will be able to do a role on behalf of 100 other teachers, rather than every teacher having to, be doing so many things all on their own at once. We've got a question from Dunya. How about students who cannot complete online work at home? Yasodai, do you want to take that one? How do you deal with those students who can't do online work at home?
So we've actually built that into, we've called them like learning continuity plans, to be able to plan for students who don't have internet access. So for example, we started at Rooty Hill High School with year 7 and 8 with faculty's redesigning learning tasks basically to get students to the end of the term, and really thinking about cognitive load and what that would look like. So we had a faculty representative from each faculty coming together to design sort of 5 learning tasks. Kind of like a task of the day, work from home booklet was developed. So students could also complete those activities online, but the actual tasks were created in a way that it wouldn't disadvantage students without internet. But we've also had system support from the department in organising internet dongles for students without access. And also we prioritised our year 10, 11 and 12s to be able to take home equity laptop devices. And then planning ahead for next term as well, we're doing a similar strategy with year 9. But basically in thinking about a continuity of learning, even for the senior years, subject teams are looking at, well, how is it that we can do that and not be reliant on the internet as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. We're going to move on to assessment in a minute. Did you want to say something, Natasha? I thought you paused.
That's right. I might add it in later.
Okay. Before we do, one thing I'm just going to throw in, which maybe in various points it'd be interesting to hear people respond to. I guess one thing that online remote learning brings is the opportunity to sort of leverage scale in different ways. So, if one teacher creates a fantastic 15-minute learning session, then you would think that could be shared to every class in the school, not just to one class, which could then ease the burden on others. So I'm not sure if there's a lot of that going on, but it does seem to me that there are some real opportunities. You could potentially have one, year 11 extension maths teacher creating a lesson for every class in the state. Anyway, but I'll just push that out there. It's something I'd be interested to see if schools are finding ways to take advantage of that kind of leveraging of this current environment. And just while we're there, anyone want to jump in on that? Is there anything particular happening that people have noticed or can report?
I can just...
There you go.
You go, Matt.
You're on mute, Matt.
Unmute, Matt.
Matt, turn off.
Thank you.
There we go.
Yes. We've had to throw out a lot of assumptions in terms of, whether it is assessment that we'll talk about or wellbeing or learning in general or how we use our LMS or attendance and all these things. We've had to acknowledge that it's not just moving to a distance ed environment or which is a whole, like I sort of threw out on Twitter yesterday, it's a whole branch of education that we would have to learn about. It's layered on top of that is the fact that we're in a pandemic, semi-lockdown kind of environment. So it's not as simple as sending work home to students and just expecting them to be able to mimic the classroom at home. And we know that parents are feeling that now as well. And we know the teachers are feeling that because we want to actually engage with our students. We don't want to just, push, boxes of work to them digitally or otherwise and just say, off you go, good luck. So I think at our school, it was having some very rapid but very honest conversations about what expectations we can have, and knowing that, like what you were talking about before, Miles, the idea of one teacher being, being able to lead the instruction, perhaps that part of learning for a whole bunch of students might be forced upon us. Because, at the time when we were looking at a trend that was going up quite significantly, and now we are flattening the curve to some degree, and I'm not a medical expert, but some of our assumptions we had to work with was, what if one of your 4 languages teachers was out of action? What if half of the English department was out of action? Is our model adaptive enough to be able to accommodate those realities? And the same thing for students and parents too. What if a student is just so stressed, whether they've got, chronic conditions like Martin was talking about, or just they are stressed for a week and they just have to say, sorry, I just cannot engage this week. Is our model adaptable enough for that scenario?
Nice. We're going to move along, but Natasha, I'm going to let you take on the next question. We're going to talk about assessment, how schools are managing assessment, and then you can chime in with, I can see you're keen to say something else as well. Off you go.
So we've found that trying to get the balance right on assessment is really challenging. We, as a school, were really mindful of postponing too much assessment, particularly with stage 6, because obviously, the vaccine for COVID is quite a long way away. And what we didn't want to do is create a bottleneck later on with assessment. So what we've been doing is adjusting where we can. So we've run a few online assessments. So there was a HSC mathematics assessment that was done as an online task. There was also a Year 12 legal studies assessment that was done as an online task. And I think what kind of drove a lot of the thinking behind those tasks is, and I know Martin was talking about this before we started officially, is you don't have those same sort of security controls when you're running an assessment at home. You know, you can have the task run through something timed, but you still don't know, you know, if they've got their open book in front of them. So we really had a lot of discussion around, well, why don't we just make it open book to start with? And that way everyone's on a level playing field. We have been trying to keep times to assessment. One of the Year 10 assessments I ran at the end of last term, we gave them 24 hours, but for the stage 6 ones, we've tried to keep it to the same sort of time they'd get in a class situation. But we are aware that we need to be really flexible, that while we've, you know, used equity devices and provided internet for students that don't have it, you know, they're not necessarily able to have a quiet space, tech fails. So just making sure that students know what the processes are so that if something did go wrong, they can appeal. And I think just outlining all that stuff from the beginning's reduced a bit of the stress for the kids doing those tasks too.
Yeah, good points. Look, I think with assessment as well, I mean, assessment is complex at the best of times, isn't it? You know, so it's a tricky one anyway, with what is valid assessment and how much is the student doing on their own, etc. You know, for particularly things done at home. What about for you, Cameron? What's happening with assessment, you guys?
Okay, I'll jump in very quickly and then I'll be provocative. So my first comment will be...
You said you would be.
We're trying as much as possible to keep the Year 10, 11 and 12 assessment program intact, but just allowing subject departments to shift it to research and take-home assignments wherever possible. We're leaving that up to individual heads of department. We're shifting in Year 7 to 9 where we're relying a lot more on teacher judgment than we have in the past. And as far as I'm concerned, I think that's a fantastic thing. But my provocation is that the Latin root of the word assessment means to sit beside. I think we've completely corrupted the use of the word assessment, particularly the way we use it in Australian schools. You hear children talking about going to do an assessment, which I find a quite bizarre use of the word. My hope is that the situation we're in right now leads us to, as a profession, to think a little bit more deeply about what effective assessment actually is. And the more that we consider the provision of feedback over grades, the happier I will be.
Interesting, Cameron. I mean, it is, I've thought in a few moments that, I mean, the HSC, and you look at it through one lens, is kind of the last 20 hours of your life without internet access, in terms of, yeah, how current assessment works. And I mean, that's obviously, you know, again, a little provocative, but yeah, Yasodai, how's things going with assessment for you?
So we've had a similar approach with 10, 11 and 12. We're trying to keep that very similar, and that's why we've prioritised Year 10, 11 and 12 students who don't have a device to be able to borrow one from the school. But we definitely are looking at, we've had conversations around, say, what a trial might look like next term or the term after, depending on what happens, and those conversations are ongoing. I teach Year 12 Society and Culture. It's got a major work. That's marked externally. It's due to the board in August. I've kept my students on track, but adapted timelines considering the huge change that they too have been experiencing over the last few weeks. And just to respond to Sally's comment as well about how we're ensuring we're having conversations with every student. That's been something that it's like, I think this has highlighted that it's not just about one teacher in their class or their classes. It's about really looking at how do we plan for continuity, and next term looking at this idea of having lead teachers on subject teams to account for that possibility of staff getting sick or maybe potentially needing to provide care for their families, and ensuring that each class has a plan. So we're looking at, for example, remote learning coaches being added, multiple people on each Google Classroom, and having backups there for whatever might go wrong to make sure that continuity of learning is there. And so, yeah, with assessment, we are very much looking at how we can reduce cognitive load with some tasks, and they're being redesigned. But the focus right now with Year 7, 8 and 9 has been on formative assessment. And in designing our tasks of the day, we've been really looking at how can we create opportunities for students to be able to follow through things, teachers to be able to follow up with phone calls or check-ins online. Personally, just with data issues that my students are facing, we've found that video chats you know, I might log in and I'll have half the class telling me the video is not working, and then the other half saying, oh, you know, miss, my video is fine. And then as a teacher, I just have to switch. I have to go, okay, well, I can't have 10 people not joining the video call, so we're going to get rid of the video call, and we're just going to have a chat, like just on this huge stream. And I can tell you teenagers are much faster at typing back to each other than I am. But yeah, teaching by text almost has been something. And I guess as a teacher, the hard thing sometimes, I guess, in terms of real-time learning is to be able to see, you know, like what that discussion might look like. And as I'm still working out as well, how do I enable that in an online environment and see those assessment points that as a teacher in class and the students are in front of you, it's much more easier to see. But as a school, we're looking very closely at making sure that our success criteria and like I can statements, and we've had a whole school approach to this anyway, forms the basis of our ongoing formative assessment. And in terms of those summative ones, we're following and adapting as Nessa gives us more information and working towards multiple options at the moment.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Yaso. Martin, before I go to you, I saw in the comments someone mentioning about like the practical subjects, like design. I used to be a design and technology teacher, and those guys would have to be getting very creative right now in terms of running some of those more practical subjects, particularly with assessment. But Martin, what's going on for, what are your thoughts on what people are saying generally, about this assessment?
I mean, the SAC assessment, if I just touch on that first,
that's
really interesting. Always been a really interesting one for us because, you know, our students are at home, you know, for the vast majority. They do come in to VSB, you know, on occasion, but for the GAT assessment, you know, traditionally, but otherwise they're at home. And so it makes ranking incredibly difficult because you have, you know, you might have a 3-hour window for a SAC assessment for an English SAC, or, you know, a 2-hour window rather. But you know that some students are spending 5, you know, crafting their response. And so ranking those assessments in anticipation of where you predict they will be in their exams is incredibly difficult. You know, you get a gut, and you know, for the most part, as you know, Cameron was indicating, you know, that teacher assessment is assessment of their ability to respond at a particular level is incredibly important and the best measure. It has to be for us. You know, there's no other way. Look, the other thing I think that's probably, well, a couple of things that I think are worth mentioning. Firstly, checks for understanding within the work that you're putting forward are incredibly important. I mean, we found I've been at VSB for about 11 years, and over that transition, we've moved over several platforms. And one of the things we've definitely noticed over that time is that if you don't push back on students to do multiple self-assessments as they're working through the materials, you end up marking a lot of work. In fact, what you do is you become incredibly reactive to the students' submissions, and you don't spend any time teaching. And so what we've done over the last 5 or 6 years is really pull back on some of that and try and insert far more teacher voice into the materials. So that's audio files to support, you know, to written instruction materials and assessments, and lots of video use. And over time, we're finding that and providing, you know, perhaps a rich task, particularly at 7 to 10, one big rich task that might fall at the end of a week or at the end of 2 weeks, with a lot of self-assessed work supported by teachers and online classes in between. And it frees up teachers incredibly to be able to respond to student needs as they arise. You just don't have the opportunity to walk past the back of, you know, behind their desk and see how they're going. A lot of that, you know, that just-in-time assessment needs to happen, you know, the student needs to be able to do that. And I think there are a lot of clever ways you can do it, but it's about really thinking about what sort of support you would provide as you're provisioning the materials. So, for example, if you're providing a long written statement that you want the students to accommodate, well, providing it with an audio file at the beginning and in the middle that says, you know, look, this is going to be scary. There's a lot of text here, but don't be put off. And then providing an audio file perhaps at the end or in the middle that says, look, we're halfway. How have you gone? What's the lens that you're using to accommodate, you know, to take account of what's in here? You know, what are the key ideas? This is what I took out of it. So you're inserting teacher voice into those materials so that you don't have to stand by them. You're not going to have that opportunity. And I think it's in light of that, providing the teachers with the tools to be able to do that nimbly, dynamically. So every teacher should be using screencasting, tools to be able, so that they can do quick and dirty responses to, student inquiries that they can watch over and over. A really good little nimble, stripped back audio recorder so that they can really quickly punch out quick audio files that kind of support the written materials that they're providing the students. It's just every opportunity you get to put that your voice into the home, juxtaposed against the materials, is a win. With that significantly reduced, isolation is such a crucial concern for kids that are learning at home. That's going to greatly support your assessment, in my view.
That's great, Martin. Some great ideas there. I really like the idea of just, it is so easy through a voice memo or whatever on your phone, just to kind of record a little bit of something that you can then share with your students. Now, just a reminder to the panelists, the Google Doc is growing with people adding things in there. So I'd briefly forgotten about it. So if you have too, remember to put things there. Also, for those who are watching, if you have any ideas, links, etc., we'll share the Google Doc with you at the end, but if you post anything into the chat, I'll be able to capture that as well. So if you've got any links, any ideas or thoughts or whatnot, just post it in the chat, and then I'll curate the chat later on when we're done, and bundle that together into a document that we can all share. Now, before I throw to you, Matt, there's a couple of questions here that you might want to tackle while you're talking. Actually, why don't you go, Matt, and then we'll tackle a couple of questions after. So you go.
Look, I just want to add really quickly to what others have said. Yeah, a lot of rethinking of assessment, and we just had an assessment and reporting committee meet today to sort of formalise a lot of it. 7 to 10 is a focus on formative assessment and teacher judgment, and then 11 and 12 really trying to keep some semblance of an assessment pattern, but knowing that it might change. And in fact, I think the most important thing hasn't been the documentation; it's been the conversations with students to reassure them and to lead them through the changes that are happening and the fact that we don't know everything, and to reassure them that we'll adapt the structure to suit whatever the circumstances happen to be. Because the last conversations we had with them again was that, in that context of the trend going up, and we'll adapt, and we have to adapt for their sake. And I don't envy the policy people to have to make these rules up and to develop these, I should say, because, and then we'll act upon what's best for the students and what's in line with that policy.
Great. While you're on a roll there, Matt, do you want to take one of these? So in stage 6, how are the online tasks run in a way to prevent students from getting someone else to do the task for them? Example, maths.
Far out. I guess that's always been true pre-COVID, and will always be true. So it's just about acknowledging that, we do, as Natasha was talking about way earlier as well, that we do have to sit down and think about, do we talk... We've got to redesign those questions. This has been something that people have talked about forever, to not be Googleable, because if they're Googleable, why are we asking? And to really focus on what matters. And I guess I don't have a more specific answer than that, but it's been a big learning curve for us. Like I said, we throw all the assumptions out the window, indicative hours, all sorts of different things that we used to rely on to tell us things. And now it's more about negotiation and working out what matters.
With some of the tech around that, what we've been using in HSIE, which is my department, it's pretty crude, but we've been creating classwork tasks on Google Classroom. We've been scheduling a start and setting a finish time, and doing it where the paper is a Google Doc that creates a copy for every student. And one thing you can do with that is you can look at the version history for the document. So you can see if a student sort of just copied and pasted chunks in over time. So it's pretty crude, but we're all sort of just trying to make it up as we go, I guess. And so far that seems to be working for us quite well.
And most of these tools have connection to Turnitin or some kind of plagiarism checker or something like that too. And again, if you do have to ask a question that is, someone somewhere has asked about the rise of Hitler in the last however many years. So if you do have to put those particular tools in place, there are heaps of tools out there to help you with that.
Cool. Okay, there's one more question. Surely one of the worries built into the New South Wales system is the external examination system. Do you think this is a chance for system change to be more reliant on teacher judgment rather than of student ability rather than external assessment? It's a pretty big topic. I'm not sure if anyone wants to make a quick comment on that.
I'll make a quick comment, and I'm not directly going to answer that because it's a huge question and it's a great question. But one of the things we have been wondering about with our heads of department is if the HSC for some reason was not held, what would that look like for year 12? So we've started to think about the possibility of sending all students away with some sort of portfolio of work that they could take to interviews for university. And so just starting to rethink what we send students away with if the HSC wasn't held this year.
Okay. Hey, we're going to move on to teacher wellbeing, a huge topic. Love to hear some ideas from how you guys are looking after your teachers. Let's maybe hear first from Natasha.
I started the last one. Does anyone else want to start?
Oh, did you? Sorry.
I'm happy to start.
Yeah, you go, Yasa.
So I lead the induction group, co-lead at Rooty Hill High School, and you know, I've been thinking a lot about what would it be like to be in your first term of teaching, you know, and experiencing all this. And something I didn't expect was that our first induction meeting online, where all the teachers from the week before, where we were all actually together, had like a task to try a student self-reflection in their classes. And coming back in, you know, we did a check-in about how everyone was going, and they were actually really excited about trying out all these tools and were very familiar with them, probably had adapted better than other staff, in all honesty. But we found that the online environment, with them screen sharing and taking turns to actually share their ideas and expertise, it enabled a better meeting, you know, in terms of participation, especially with that group, because some of them, sometimes when we're in person for the whole term, shied away from that in terms of dominant voices. So that's an interesting thing. With wellbeing, working for the department, there's been a series of webinars, even in the last week. I myself signed up to one on leading remotely. There was one on boosting your psychological wellbeing. The services for our employee assistance program have been very much promoted through our principals and our school leaders. And part of that also includes specialist counselling session for new teachers. So in my role, I've advocated for that, for the beginning teacher team to be able to do that. But just the reminders, I guess, about stepping away from the computer and having a break. I think when you're in schools, you're so used to just being on the go, having corridor chats with people, and you know, sometimes they're really great debriefing points, and that's something that's, I guess, missed even in terms of online meetings and check-ins. But that really, I think the key to teacher wellbeing is collaboration and having opportunities set by school leadership to be able to give people the time to work in subject teams and make sure that whatever's coming, we're going to be dealing with as a team. Because, you know, we don't want one of our teachers getting unwell and having that pressure of, oh, you know, I'm worried about my classes. And so that's very much factored into our wellbeing. There's been some great resources as well for us from non-school-based teachers at the department. Heaps of resources have been added to the Learning from Home curriculum pages. There's statewide Kizzy Microsoft Teams. Like for faculty, each faculty's got one set up. There's a primary school one, and people are sharing ideas on there as well. So it's good to know that there's been a lot of collaboration being facilitated by the system as well.
Matt, did you want to make a comment? What are you doing at your school to look after your teachers? You're on mute.
so focused, sorry. Yeah, so keeping them in mind as humans as well. So about, you know, 40% of our staff have school age kids. I've got kids at daycare. So front of mind are people as human beings, and the same thing with students, and building our model around that, building our model around people, not policy documents. And so our staff all have access to an employee access service for mental health support, and also saying as quickly as possible to staff, look, let's work out a remote working policy, which we haven't had a need of before for teaching staff in particular. So we've developed that and rolled that out in tandem with teacher feedback, and just working through it together, and having all the, you know, my principal has had her door open as much as possible, as crazy as this time has been for her, and our deputy and all the staff who have been working in, and Melissa Riley, who's here in the chat here, and the team that have been developing our model to keep people at the centre of this, and saying, you know what, your health is important. As Yasodai was saying before, it shouldn't get to a point where someone does have to choose between, you know, setting up a class, as we do when we're sick on a particular day, right, and set up your 6 periods of the day, and actually taking the time that they need to be well, or take care of other people to be well as well.
I'd be interested as well to know if anyone's got any data. Are teachers okay? I mean, we've talked a lot about the fact that we need them to be okay. Be interested to hear if anyone's got any sense of whether they are doing okay. Cameron, what are you doing with your guys?
I can jump in and answer that question. We've had 2 weeks of our distance learning plan, and we just surveyed our students, our parents, and our staff. So we've got fairly extensive feedback from all those 3 different areas of the school, and the staff are doing okay. They really are. There's some that are struggling, but as you'd expect, teachers are pretty amazing people, and Andy Hargraves uses the expression collaborative professionalism. We've had a lot of our teachers commenting about the extent of collaboration and collegiality over the last 3 weeks, and it's just been extraordinary in terms of sharing the workload and people looking after each other, and that's what you'd expect from our profession. Things that have particularly helped, our distance learning plan states up front that our first and key aim is health and wellbeing for both the students and the staff involved, and that's central to everything that we're deciding as we go forward. While we do have a timetable, we're allowing very flexible use of that timetable. So if you're at home with 3 kids and you've got to teach as well, you've got some choice about how you actually use your time when you are online and video conferencing and when you're expecting students to do individual work. And that's been popular both with staff and with students. Our exec has divided up all of our staff. So every exec member's got about 15 people, and we're responsible for phoning them and having individual conversations. And that's been going very, very well. Those listening ears, just giving people a sounding board and letting people speak has been very, very important in terms of keeping people on board and going forward in terms of mental health. But the last point that I'll make is in relation to teacher wellbeing. The cry that we're hearing from our teachers at the moment is that 3 weeks ago, they wanted upskilling in tech tools. Right now, they're wanting upskilling in how to use those tech tools to teach online. So it's about pedagogy now, and that's what I'm turning my attention to next.
Natasha?
Yeah, just to add to that, so we also surveyed students and our staff. And I think actually just surveying staff and giving them a chance to every single person have a voice and have a say is in itself a really powerful wellbeing tool. But what was really interesting, we didn't expect this, is what a lot of teachers were saying is that they feel their wellbeing has been looked after by having really clear strategies put forward by our principal and by our deputies. They felt very supported. They felt really clear on what was expected of them. They felt like actually rolling into a pretty chaotic situation, things were managed really well. And I think it's probably something for leaders to consider is, you know, if you are clearly communicating to your staff, that is another way of looking after their well-being, you know, as well as, you know, online yoga classes and all that kind of stuff, which I'm sure is happening around the place too.
Great, thanks. Hey, Martin, I might get you to double up. If you just give us your thoughts on teacher wellbeing, and we'll roll straight into student wellbeing. It's different for you guys, but yeah, you've been doing it for a long time. What's important when it comes to looking after your teachers in your experience?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it's the same question for both groups. I think in a way, is how are you recognising vulnerability? How are you making that assessment? I mean, I think for us, we have 250 staff that work in a large open plan office, 2 wings, everyone's in together. So we're used to being incredibly collegiate. You know, in many ways, you know, that's the biggest challenge for us, and the biggest shift is I'm used to having almost an entire English department sitting around me and a humanities department there and a science, you know, so having, you know, hundreds of people available to you so that you can just pop over to that desk, and then I can pop over into my friend's office, and then I can go and see, you know, one of the other OPs or another. None of that is there anymore. So the biggest shift for us has been working out what that looks like. I just saw Zoom morning teas in the chat.
Yes, I saw that too.
I must steal that. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the other question, the thing with teachers, in terms of teachers' vulnerability for me in particular, and it's something that we've always been perhaps a little watchful of, is that it's that, you know, filling and, you know, it's the bucket that can't be filled. You know, teachers that are inclined to just work through till 3 in the morning. And for us, that's always been a risk, because you know, that's been one of those things that we look for, because, you know, you definitely have those teachers that once there's no bell, there's no, you know, I'm going home now, there's that cognitive switch. They're just on, and they're on all the time. And so that's one of the things that I'm particularly looking for. I guess one of the ways in which we accommodate that for teachers is you know, we have well-constructed sequences of learning with really clear expectations. And in a way that, you know, that's perhaps one of those things that best supports teachers. Where we see the other area that we see high anxiety with our teachers is where that's not clear, where the assessment isn't clear, or the, you know, the continuity of that sequence of learning isn't clear. That causes a lot of agitation and stress for teachers. So in a way, you know, those well-constructed sequences of learning that you're putting forward and that, you know, the teaching teams are using are a support, you know, in a really significant way. I think, and you wanted to move on.
Yeah, just jump on to student wellbeing, and I'm aware of the time where we might we'll see how we go. But maybe if we don't get around to everyone on the next couple of questions, then, you know, maybe we'll just jump to people who feel that they've got something they really want to jump in on. But yeah, go Martin. How do you look after your students?
I'll be brief. Look, I think that the thing about student wellbeing is, in particular for us, is, you know, isolation is our crucial concern. You know, working remotely can be a very isolating experience. Regardless of how many Zoom morning teas you factor in, or, you know, opportunities for online classes, you can only accommodate so many. And once that switches off and people are gone, you know, once this meeting closes, you're back on your own again. And so I think the starting question for teachers, and, you know, this is no surprise to anyone here in the room, is, you know, relationships, building and supporting and maintaining those relationships, and constant communication is really key. And at VSV, we really carefully track the significance of those conversations. So we record every conversation in a database. There's, you know, if there's concerning issues, they come up and are easily accessed by staff. So, I mean, these are big structures that are not easily translatable, but I guess I'm putting it forward as, you know, we really highly value the way in which we navigate those relationships and the way in which we're supporting them. You know, it sits at the centre of our pedagogical model. For very obvious reasons. And I think my advice would be about looking for opportunities to disclose vulnerability and distress. So there's, you know, through, you know, whether that's through email or through your LMS or through phone calls, before and after conversations in live classes is a good one. You know, assessment provides really good opportunities to disclose vulnerability. If you've got a written task, for example, where there's a provision for an opportunity for students to disclose a narrative that might indicate this distress. And I mean, I think it's just about knowing your kids. You know, if you know your kids and you know that you can immediately recognise, you know, low mood and agitation that they might have, or defiance that's unexpected, or embarrassment where you wouldn't anticipate it, or even, you know, manifestations of pride or something like that. You know, knowing your kids is the best tool we have to be able to recognise those vulnerabilities.
Thanks, Martin. I remember when talking to April Taylor about online teaching, she was saying that, you know, for her, one critical thing was being able to have cameras on and see all the faces of those students, to kind of be able to see, you know, that they're there, that they're engaged, that they're okay. And obviously that bumps into privacy issues, which mean that maybe that's not the right thing to do in a lot of cases. But I'm thinking also, how do we replicate those, you know, playground conversations with a little bunch of kids, or in the corridor,
where do you do back
after
at the
class?
shelter shed?
Yeah,
Where's behind the shelter shed?
So how to recreate that in a way that feels okay? You know, I don't know, group calling kids doesn't feel like a thing that you would be doing. I'd be interested to hear from others. How are we looking after our kids in, you know, outside of the classroom? Does someone want to jump in and chat about that?
Sure, I'll jump in. So at Rooty Hill High, we've had our year advisors have daily year meets with their whole year group, just for 10-15 minutes. So the year group can actually see their year advisor. There's been virtual deputy principal recognition assemblies happened at the end of last term, as they normally would. And in terms of following up with students that an individual teacher may not have heard from or haven't seen online in a few days, we've had the support of our head of junior school and head of senior school, working with our SAS staff and administrative staff actually to help teachers with some of those phone calls and follow up. So that's been really important, just to know that we have tracked every single student, and our head of admin has been leading that. And for our deputy principal assembly, our senior leaders, our year 12 students, like leadership team, actually made this wonderful video where they had a message for the whole school community. I'll share it on the chat here. So that was played to all students, and it was just a remarkable thank you. Like, I got teary, so I did a lot of stuff in watching it. So if you've got a little bit of time, I do recommend having a look. I'll post the link.
Fantastic.
One of the things we ran at the end of last term was we had like a wellbeing day. So we didn't have any classes for the day, but what students had to do was go to like a website that we created, and there was a whole bunch of different kinds of wellbeing activities, and they had to create sort of 100 points from different categories. And then at the end of the day, they had to submit online like a reflection with like a gratitude kind of task in there as well. And I think a couple of things that our community really appreciated about that is, first of all, just being really upfront and saying what matters as well right now is, apart from your education, which of course is important, is that we all take some time to look after ourselves. And it was really interesting to just see, you know, especially the kind of, you know, year 10 boys that maybe don't get into that kind of gratitude stuff, actually really taking it seriously and sharing photos of their tidied up room before and after. So I will shout out to Cheltenham Girls, because the idea of a wellbeing website was something we got from them. But just having a central place where kids can go and find wellbeing activities that was then directed on the day, I think was really successful for us too.
That's a great idea. Matt, or did you want to share anything? You can unmute yourself. Yay, you got it.
Yeah, so from the start, we developed a continuous learning page in our learning management system, which had tiles that go through to all different areas. And you can hear my kids downstairs, by the way, remote working. And so it had quick and easy links through to pastoral information with all sorts of wellbeing activities, and that's where we pushed girls to go if we had any new information. So that's where announcements would come out and things like that. We have a little on that daily check-in. Sorry, there's printing happening in the background as well from downstairs. What we also had was at the bottom of the daily check-in is a little wellbeing check-in as well. And we're also doing student surveys. We're doing check-ins through Homeroom live video conference through Zoom in our continuous learning model for next term, which is in the link that people can have a look at. And so a few different check-in, some regular and some consistent across all students, and some more specific through inclusive learning or for other reasons. Yeah,
great. I mean, it's just every student and every teacher getting noticed regularly, isn't it, to make sure that they're all okay. Cameron, do you want to jump in first? We might combine the next two topics, and you can comment on student wellbeing if you want to at the same time. But how schools are supporting teacher practice, and maybe we'll bundle in digital tool selection and implementation. Okay. Yeah, off you go.
I'll try. It sounds like you're throwing me three, and I'll try and do them quickly. So just in terms of what hasn't been mentioned about student wellbeing, we're getting feedback from many of our students that they're actually noticing they're sleeping better and eating better now than they do normally at school. With the travel time cut down, they're actually commenting that they can exercise more effectively at home as well, which I think is a really interesting outcome. Strength and conditioning guys at our school are doing a phenomenal job in pushing out really fun activities for students and parents to take part in. They're using Instagram for that. It's become quite popular. And we're using some of our staff who are not being utilised effectively in a distance mode, such as our teacher librarians. We're rebadging them as community connectors, and we're utilising them to touch base with parents and students who are having either organisational difficulties or motivational difficulties for one-on-one mentoring. So they're just a couple of things in terms of student wellbeing. In terms of teacher practice, we started very early on by outlining in our distance learning plan that three of our key aims were to keep it simple, to only focus on essential content and to really pare back, and that our main priority was connections and relationships. Now that's still the case, but what we're increasingly looking to do now is find and share examples of good practice. As I indicated, that's what teachers are really asking for at the moment. So while we've all got our head around taking our subjects online, and we've got our head around some of the basic tools to utilise, I think the next step for us is actually little things like working out not just how to use Zoom, but how to effectively use breakout rooms in Zoom. Not just how to have a class conversation on a video conference, but how to utilise protocols and thinking routines to ensure that it's structured in a really effective way. how to invite guest speakers in. So yesterday, I've lined up 2 guest speakers for the next couple of weeks. I've got Professor Joan Beaumont from ANU. She's stuck at home in isolation, delighted to have a video conference with my Year 9 history class, and someone from the Australian War Memorial is doing the same. What I'm finding as well is that we as teachers, I hate to say it, are not as good with our instructions online as we might be in class. So while we think we're providing really clear and coherent instructions, our students aren't finding our instructions clear and coherent. So we're having a conversation at our school now about how we can provide some templates to make sure that everyone understands exactly what they're required to do. I'm doing a course at the moment with Global Online Academy. They've got lots of free courses, and I'd really encourage you to have a look at them. They're fantastic. So I'm picking up lots of ideas from them. Already been mentioned here. I'm a history teacher, but rather than rely on have my students hand in writing every week, actually rely a little bit more on the use of students handing in some video responses, using playful emojis and that sort of thing, just making our instructions a little bit more playful, getting really nice tips from that course from Global Online Academy. I'll leave digital tools to others. I'll stop there. Thanks.
That's great, Cameron. Thanks for that. Martin, let's hear from you. Yeah, on I guess the twin topics of teacher practice and digital tool selection and implementation.
I mean, I guess it's in terms of teacher practice.
Take 2 hours and put it into 2 minutes.
It's interesting. I mean, I mean, there's 2 scales, I guess, at VSV in terms of our program development. The first one is, we spend a year developing our programs with a teacher of 0.7, a multimedia design team and an editing team, a usability and design team, all work on that program. And we've got 17 being built this year. We'll do about 35 VCE courses next year. It's a huge undertaking and so I guess that's one part of it, that what we end up with each year is, at the beginning of the year is the teachers, so in the VCE program, VCE Geography, start with a program that is fully fleshed out for the year, and then they just they modify it to suit the cohort as they go, and deliver online classes and just contact students. There's a lot of student contact over the phone, through webinars, you name it. But we also require them, in order to be nimble and respond to student needs, because our cohort is completely different every year. We have a new enrolment of 5,000 students every year, and the significant number of those students are brand new to our environment. So with that in mind, we have to pivot our courses quickly to be able to support quite differing student needs. We might have, for example, VCE Geography, we might have 20 students with ASD. The next year we might have 50 in that course alone. So ensuring teachers have tools like the ones I mentioned earlier, like good screencasting tools that they can use and their students can use, good audio tools that they can use, Hey,
Martin, can I jump in? Because one of the questions that was sitting there was asking if you could mention some of the products that you use or drop them into the Google Doc, just to...
well, I could absolutely drop them into the Google Doc. Perhaps if I drop them in at the end of the session, I
that'd be great.
Suggestions in. I mean, I think that the really critical thing for me is, what sort of simple, what qualifies as a simple tool? What qualifies as a nimble tool that's easily directional? That often it's a tool that does one thing and it does it really well. It's not providing 50 features. It's providing one feature, and it's a really streamlined approach. That it's quick to master, that has a really clean design. I mean, they're all pretty, that it's got good cross-contextual use, so you can use it in concert with other digital tools. A good one that jumps into mind is, bubble.us. It's a really good little mind mapping tool. Is it the best mind mapping tool out there? No, it's quite stripped back, but can you jump in and build a mind map in 3 minutes without a login and export a JPEG? Absolutely. And anyone can master it quickly, and anyone can use it briskly. And it's also about how you're introducing those tools to your students. So, I mean, one of the methods that I use is something I call creative discovery, where you get them to build a narrative with a tool. Doesn't matter what it is. If it's a mind mapping tool, you get them to make a piece of artwork with it, or you get them to tell a story with that mind mapping tool. They get to understand the breadth of that simple tool. And then you have, and they usually stretch it far more by employing it in a creative way than they might otherwise. And so you can then leverage it far more effectively, far more quickly with your class with an accessible item. But having that, being able to be nimble and flexible with those, and often the tools that are most amenable to that, in my experience, are those that don't have a lot of login constraints, that are quick to master, that are doing one thing really well, that you can sit down and master in 3 minutes. Those are the tools I particularly look for. So I guess it's huge LMS platform that we have and very complex. Small nimble tools that teachers can punch out really quickly and provide for students dynamically in a live class, for example, where there's very little instruction that's needed to accompany them.
That's great. Thanks, Martin. Natasha, do you want to chime in?
I was going to say, there's one thing my principal really would like me to add, so I better make sure I get it in. But certainly from our leadership's point of view, one of the things that's probably made our last 11th hour jump to a virtual school really effective was trying to just really simplify the tools that people used. And I think it kind of connects to what Martin says, is there's any number of different tools that will do the same job. And I think for a lot of our staff who maybe weren't as comfortable with technology, we just thought if we pare it back and we say, we want everyone to have every class on Google Classroom, and we want everyone to make sure they've got some colleagues in there as well, just in case you get sick. As Matt said before, we were making these plans when things were looking particularly bad. And we went with Zoom because it's so easy for everybody to use. And I think just having those two things, we say, look, we really just want you to use these two things. It just made life quite simple for everyone who wasn't feeling really comfortable with tech. What we had is sort of sitting side by side. This is a bit of a cheat sheet, which I think kind of comes to a question that Nigel was asking before in the chat, which is in terms of giving feedback to students, here's some tools that you can use to help with that. So we've been promoting quizzes as a really easy online quiz tool that teachers can sort of have that self-marks itself. So, in terms of teacher workload, that's one less thing for you to do. And we've also been promoting peer grade. I don't know if anyone's used peer grade before, but students can drop a piece of writing into peer grade. It makes it anonymous and shoots it out to 3 of their peers to receive a bit of peer feedback. And the teacher can jump in and add some feedback there as well. So I guess for us, thinking about how we can just make it super straightforward for people. There'll always be people who want to experiment with other stuff, and that's great. But we've sort of said, look, here's a couple of tools that we'd really think will make your life easier. If you want to go outside the box, that's great. But that's kind of up to you.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Thanks, Natasha. Cameron? Oh, you started. You went first, didn't you? Sorry,
Yeah.
Who haven't we had yet?
Look, I'll jump in.
Yeah, Matt.
The digital tools one, and like Natasha said, have some core tools. In our case, it's our learning management system and a couple of tools that sit around that. We're very lucky to have a laptop program that's been running at the school for several years before I arrived. So the girls were used to having particular environments and having that consistent across the school, which has made our transition to a virtual online /remote /continuous environment much more smooth than it would otherwise have been. But starting with those tools that are familiar and working out whether the set of tools that we have works for us. And as several people have said, if people want to go beyond the core tools and it fits within all the usual IT policies and fair use and all that sort of stuff, go for it. But I, being in charge of the IT team as well, I've been saying, look, let's focus on supporting those core tools so that we got that base load of support for students and for teachers, and then people can experiment and go crazy with innovation, of course, but then bring it back to, is it valuable? And also, what problem or opportunity are you addressing? It's not just about chasing the shiny thing. And that's something I wanted to say as well. I'm getting lots and lots of emails from different companies, some quite tasteful, others not, about using products and services. So don't just chase the shiny things. Teachers hardly ever do, but don't be tempted, as stressed out as you might be. Reach out to a colleague from another school through social media or whatever before you reach out to one of these unknown commercial entities who might solve your problem, but they might cause more.
Nice. Okay. Was anyone else wanted to comment on that?
I'll just jump in. I guess in talking about teacher practice and what the focus really is we're always talking about lesson design and quality lesson design at our school. And we've been fortunate that we've had a Google domain in the school since 2016. So, that's been a familiar tool. Of course, we've had many staff join since then, even before, I guess, we knew the situation with COVID-19 and how it's escalated. We'd made the decision for our beginning teacher team to actually take part in Google Certified Educator as this key learning platform that we use. And with staff, we've been using Microsoft Teams. So we've just sort of made it easy in terms of students. We're using Google Classroom. With all of our staff teams, we've created Microsoft Teams for each one of those. And in talking about other digital tools and things, we have been using some of the visible thinking kind of ideas in an online space, and still exploring those with the focus on critical and creative thinking that we've had. So going into next term, it's really going to be looking at, how is it, like Cameron said, the focus will be on pedagogy and making sure that we can create the challenging, the task, the rigor, but make it accessible as well for our students in whichever way that they will be learning from home or at school. Yeah. Nice.
Thank you. Look, we've run out of time. I think we've packed in a huge amount. What I might do, if we'll give every panelist just one more shot at making a final comment. One of the questions that came through beforehand, which you may want to address in your final one, was two-part. One was about just, the beginning of this next term and the uncertainty. How long are we away? When will we be back? Just how people are managing the uncertainty of this coming term at school. And also the question about supporting professional development for teachers during this time. Is it all about this, or is other PD, going to be a priority as well? So why don't we lead off with Martin? Off you go. Final words to our audience.
Oh, I keep struggling to find that mute button. I'm having the same problem as Matt. Perhaps the only thing I would just add is, and I'll just post it in the chat as well, but we find, there's tools that I particularly use in inductions with new staff, and we have close to 100 new staff each year that are inducted at least. Using the SAMR and TPAC models as ways of measuring the depth and breadth of your use of technology. While that's not going to be top of mind this week, they're both models that we find really useful and accessible in determining the way in which teachers are viewing their professional knowledge and the depth of the tool use of these new tools that they're accommodating. I think both are, there's a wealth of information online about both of them if people that are watching haven't seen one or both of those models before. And I find them, they're essential tools in our toolkit in guiding staff as they come into digital learning at VSB. Usually takes about 6 months for new teachers with us to really feel like they're starting to put down roots and really get to understand the new methodologies that they're working with, a new approach to teaching. So I think have reasonable expectations of yourselves. Don't expect too much of yourself. Be kind to yourself is my recommendation. And use some models as you gain confidence, like TPAC and SAMR, to give you a bit of a better sense of how you're faring as you progress within your teaching teams.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Matt.
Look, I'll just add one thought that people might want to try, as we roll out these different models, is try and describe a day in the life of a student in that model on whatever given day it is, and see if it matches what your expectations actually are or what the model's designed to do. See if chat to your inclusive learning or diverse learning units, and see, as Cam mentioned earlier, if your instructions are clear. We've had a lot of very deep discussions with our inclusive learning team about that, whether it's for just a simple, what we consider to be a simple class task, or whether it is for an assessment task, and just make sure that the student, our expectations, our empathy towards our students and the people around them matches the expectations we're pushing out.
Yeah, thanks. Natasha.
We're having this conversation today about, what do we plan for? And I think where we're sitting is we probably would like to plan for, assuming that will perhaps be online for the beginning, but whatever we're planning, making sure that it's agile so that we can adapt if we are back in the classroom from 2 weeks. So one of the things we're quite keen to explore in a bit more detail is expanding our project-based learning models for particularly 7 to 10. In our student survey, a couple of comments kept coming up over and over again, which was students feeling unmotivated, missing actually working collaboratively with each other, because that's been a huge focus at our school for years, is, you know, collaborative learning, getting students to own their learning in that regard. So what I think we'll be starting next term with is a project-based learning approach. There's loads of stuff online, which I'll link later, from PBL Works, how to make sure your project-based learning is rigorous and meets the gold standard. But we're hoping that that's the kind of thing that we could pivot to being used in school quite easily if we are all back sooner than we had imagined. But at the same time, I think if we are virtual, it gives students a chance to actually have that interaction with each other again that they're really missing in a learning space, not just a social space. But it also gives a bit of flexibility then with the teachers, so that I think perhaps that period by period model that was good for us as we rolled into virtual is maybe not sustainable moving forward for all our students. So thinking about how we might have scheduled check-ins to monitor the project and some direct instruction, but having it a bit sort of flexible as we go as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Natasha. Yaso.
I guess it comes down to just wellbeing, both for students and teachers. One thing that our wellbeing team did for our remote working from home resource packs that went home and were online for our junior school was, at the end of every task of the day, there was like a wellbeing check-in reflection. And I think as adults, you know, making this transition to having so much screen time, you know, is a challenge. You know, I've definitely been guilty of just like sitting on my computer like all day and not taking a break. Hence why I joined some of those webinars offered by my department in the last week. And I think that as teachers, we need to model that. We need to be conscious of just how much, I guess, how exhausting it can be, you know, to have like online interactions, and look at other ways where we can do quick check-ins and really make, for our students, our instructions really explicit in clearing what they need to do. So I think what's worked really, really well at the school I work at is that we've had, you know, a common language for talking about learning, for having a routine, like students do a do now, the learning intentions explained to them, it's visual, there's a success criteria, and, you know, they know that they'll do some sort of reflection at the end. And we've been really, really careful to make sure that we have those familiar routines in place for our students. And I think in checking in with our staff, we also need to have things that are familiar. So we have like for example, my head teachers have a daily quick faculty check-in, and we're starting every single morning as a whole school on Microsoft Teams with like a quick kind of muster briefing, and just having people to have an opportunity to ask questions in the chat, and to come together as a school community as well.
Thanks. Cameron.
Thanks. 3 quick points just to finish with, and they are quick. Firstly, in the midst of what's really been quite traumatic couple of weeks for education, I'd just like to point out the agility and the flexibility with which teachers have responded to this situation. And I don't think ever again anybody should be allowed to accuse teachers of peddling an industrial factory model that's an unchanging model of school. I think that trope is well and truly dead. My second point is just in terms of the language that we use in relation to teaching and learning. I've noticed increasingly the use over the last couple of weeks of words like delivery and work. We set work, we assign work, we collect work, we mark work. I think we're losing, just because we're falling back on old habits, we're losing the language of learning and thinking. And key in my mind as we proceed into term 2 is making sure that kids keep thinking at the centre of distance learning. It can't be passive, it has to be active for them. And that leads me to my third point. And that is that I think we can afford in this situation to perhaps think a little bit less about covering content and covering the curriculum, and perhaps think a little bit more about the sort of dispositions we're enculturating within our students. What are kids going to remember when they look back on COVID-19? They're not going to remember long lists of content that they've learned over the next couple of weeks. What they're going to remember is the opportunity to become more independent, to become more resilient, to improve their self-regulation, to be forced to collaborate more effectively with peers, and to problem solve. And I think that needs to be our key message as a profession right now. Thanks.
Well said, and a nice place to finish. Just before I wrap up, everybody. Thanks so much. I'll just mention, if it interests anyone who's listening, there were 4 other really, really good webinars that were done, 2 on Google Classroom, 1 on teacher wellbeing, and 1 on running online classes. So that would be another option. If you go to the tta.edu.au site, you can enroll for free in any of those, if they would be helpful for you. We're going to wrap it up there. We've gone a little over time, but we did start a touch late, so I'm forgiving us for that. Thanks very much, everybody. I hope you got something out of this. Good luck with term 2. We're all with you. Okay, see ya.